Throughout the grinding of our souls in the gears of the great nightmare institution, when our souls are pulverized, excuse me, and our flesh hangs down in tatters like beggars' rags, we suffer too much and are too immersed in our own pain to rivet with penetrating and far-seeing gaze those pale night executioners who torture us. A surfeit of inner grief floods our eyes. Otherwise, historians of our torturers would we be? Otherwise, what historians of our torturers would we be? For it is certain they will never describe themselves as they actually are. But alas, every former prisoner remembers his own interrogation in detail, how they squeezed him, what foulness they squeezed out of him. But often he does not even remember the names, let alone think about them as human beings. So it is with me. I can recall much more, and much more that's interesting about any one of my cellmates than I can about the Captain of State Security, Yezipov, excuse me, with whom I spent no little time face to face, the two of us alone in his office. There is one thing, however, which remains with us all, as an accurate, generalized recollection, foul rot, a space totally infested with putrefaction. And even when, decades later, we were long past fits of anger or outrage in our own quiet hearts, we retain this firm impression of low, malicious, impious, and possibly muddled people. There is an interesting story about Alexander II, the Tsar, surrounded by revolutionaries who were to make 7 attempts on his life. He once visited the house of preliminary detention on Ch.4, the uncle of the big boss, where he ordered them to lock him up in solitary confinement, cell number 227. He stayed in it for more than an hour, attempting thereby to sense the state of mind of those who he had imprisoned there. One cannot but admit that for a monarch, this was evidence of moral aspiration, to feel the need and to make the effort to take a spiritual view on the matter. But it is impossible to picture any of our interrogators right up to Abakumov and Beria wanting to slip into prisoner's skin even for 1 hour, or feeling compelled to sit and meditate in solitary confinement. Their branch of service does not require them to be educated, people of broad culture and broad views, and they are not. Their branch of service does not require them to think logically, and they do not. Their branch of service requires only that they carry out orders exactly and be impervious to suffering. And that is what they do and what they are. We who have passed through their hands feel suffocated when we think of that legion which is stripped bare of universal human ideals. Although others might not be aware of it, it is clear to the interrogators at least that the cases were fabricated. Except at small conferences, they could not seriously say to one another or to themselves that they were exposing criminals. Nonetheless, they kept right on producing depositions page after page to make sure that we rotted. So the essence of it all turns out to be the credo of the Blatiny, the underworld of Russian thieves. You today, me tomorrow. They understood that the cases were fabricated, yet they kept on working year after year. How could they? Either they forced themselves not to think, and this in itself means the ruin of a human being, and simply accepted that this is the way it had to be, and that the person who gave them their orders was always right. But didn't the Nazis too, it comes to mind, argue that same way? Or else it was a matter of the progressive doctrine, the granite ideology, an interrogator in an awful Oratican sent there to Colima in 1938 as a penalty assignment, was so touched when M. Luria, former director of the Krivai-Rog industrial complex, readily agreed to sign an indictment which meant a second camp term, that he used the time they had thus saved to say, "You think we get any satisfaction from using persuasion? We have to do what the party demands of us. You're an old party member. Tell me what you would do in my place." Apparently Luria nearly agreed with him, and it may have been the fact that had already been thinking in some such terms that led him to sign readily. It is, after all, a convincing argument, but most often it was merely a matter of cynicism. The Bluecaps understood the workings of the meat grinder and loved it. In the Dujita camps in 1944, interrogator Mironenko said to the condemned Babbage, with pride in his faultless logic, "Interrogation and trial are merely judicial corroboration. It cannot alter your fate, which was previously decided. If it is necessary to shoot you, then you will be shot, even if you are altogether innocent. If it is necessary to acquit you, then no matter how guilty you are, you will be cleared and acquitted." Kushnaryev, chief of the first investigation department of the West Kazakhstan Provincial State Security Administration, laid it on the line in just that way to Adolf Sivilko. "After all, we're not going to let you out if you're a Leningrader, in other words, a Communist Party member with seniority. Just give us a person and we'll create the case." That is what many of them said jokingly, and it was their slogan. What we think of as torture, they think of as good work. The wife of the interrogator, Nikolai Grabashchenko, Volga Canal Project, said touchingly to her neighbors, "Kolya is a very good worker. One of them didn't confess for a long time, and they gave him to Kolya. Kolya talked with him for one night, and he confessed." What prompted them all to slip into harness and pursue so zealously, not truth, but totals of the proceeds of the processed and condemned, because it was most comfortable for them not to be different from the others, and because these totals meant an easy life, supplementary pay, awards and decorations, promotions in rank, and the expansion and prosperity of the organs themselves. If they ran up high totals, they could loaf when they felt like it, or do poor work, or go out and enjoy themselves at night, and that is just what they did. Low totals led to their being kicked out, to the loss of their feedback, for Stalin could never be convinced that in any district or city or military unit he might suddenly cease to have enemies. Excuse me. That was why he felt no mercy, but instead an explosion of resentment and rage towards those maliciously stubborn prisoners who opposed being fitted into the totals, who would not capitulate to sleeplessness or the punishment cell or hunger. By refusing to confess, they menaced the interrogator's personal standing It was as though they wanted to bring him down. In such circumstances, all measures were justified. If it's to be war, then war it will be. We'll ram that tube down your throat. Swallow that salt water. Excluded by the nature of their work and by deliberate choice from the higher sphere of human existence, the servitors of the Blue Institution lived in their lower sphere with all the greater intensity and avidity, and they were possessed and directed by the two strongest instincts of the lower sphere, other than hunger and sex, greed for power and greed for gain, particularly for power. In recent decades, it turned out to be more important than money. Power is a poison well known for thousands of years. If only no one were ever to acquire material power over others, but to the human being who has faith in some force that holds dominion over us all, and who is therefore conscious of his own limitations, power is not necessarily fatal. For those, however, who are unaware of the higher sphere, it is a deadly poison. For them there is no antidote. Remember what Tolstoy said about power. Ivan Ilyich had accepted an official position which gave him the authority to destroy any person he wanted to. All without exception were in his hands, and anyone, even the most important, could be brought before him as an accused. And that is just where our blue boys are. There is nothing to add to the description. The consciousness of this power and the possibilities of using it mercifully. So Tolstoy qualifies the situation, but this does not in any way apply to our boys. Constituted for Ivan Ilyich the chief interest and attraction of the service. But attraction is not the right word. It is intoxication. After all, it is intoxicating. You are still young, still, shall we say, parenthetically, a sniveling youth. Only a little while ago, your parents were deeply concerned about you and didn't know where to turn to launch you into your life. You were such a fool and you didn't even want to study. But you got through 3 years of school at that school. And then how you took off and flew, how your situation changed, how your gestures changed, your glance, the turn of your head. The Learned Council of the Scientific Institute is in session. You enter and everyone notices you and trembles. You don't take the chairman's chair. Those headaches are for the rector to take on. You sit off to one side. But everyone understands that you are the head man there. You are the special department, and you can sit there for just 5 minutes and then leave. You have an advantage over the professors. You can be called away by more important business. But later on, when you're considering their decision, you will raise your eyebrows, or better still, purse your lips, and say to the rector, "You can't do that. There are special considerations involved." That's all, and it won't be done, or else you are an occipist. A state security representative in the army, a Smirsh man, and a mere lieutenant, but the portly old colonel, the commander of the unit, stands up when you enter the room and tries to flatter you, to play up to you. He doesn't even have a drink with his chief or staff without inviting you to join them. The fact that you have only 2 tiny stars on your shoulder boards doesn't mean a thing. It is even amusing. After all, your stars have a very different weight and are measured on a totally different scale from those of the ordinary officers. On special assignments, he was sometimes even authorized to wear a major's insignia, for example, which is short of incognito, which is a sort of incognito, a convention. You have a power over all the people in the military unit or factory or district incomparably greater than that of the military commander or factory director or secretary of the district communist party. These men control people's military or official duties, wages, reputations, but you control people's freedoms. Freedom. And no one dares speak to you about it, and no one dares speak about you at meetings, and no one will ever dare write about you in the newspaper. Not only something bad, but anything good. They don't dare your name, like that of jealously guarded deity, cannot ever be mentioned. You are there. Everyone feels your presence, but it's as though you didn't exist. From the moment you don that heavenly blue service cap, you stand higher than the publicly acknowledged power. No one dares check up on what you do, but no one is exempt from you checking up on him, and therefore, in dealing with ordinary so-called citizens, for you are mere blocks of wood, it is altogether appropriate for you to wear an ambiguous and deeply thoughtful expression. For, of course, you are the one and no one else who knows about the special considerations, and therefore you are always right. There is just one thing you must never forget. You too would have been just a poor black block of wood if you had not had the luck to become one of the little links in the organs, that flexible, unitary organism inhabiting a nation as a tapeworm inhabits a human body. Everything is yours now. Everything is for you. Just be true to the organs. They will always stand up for you. They will help you swallow up anyone who bothers you. They will help you move every obstacle from your path. But be true to the organs. Do everything they order you to do. They will do the thinking for you in respect to your functions too. Today you serve in a special unit. Tomorrow you will sit in an interrogator's armchair, and then perhaps you will travel to Lake Seliger as a folklorist. Partly it may be to get your nerves straightened out, and next you may be sent from a city where you are too well known to the opposite end of the country as a plenipotentiary in charge of church affairs. Or perhaps you will become executive secretary of the Union of Soviet Writers. Be surprised at nothing. People's true appointments and true ranks are known only to the organs. The rest is merely play acting. Some honored artist or other, or hero or socialist agriculture is here today, and tomorrow, puff, he's gone. The duties of an interrogator require work, and of course, to come in during the day, at night, to sit for hours and hours, but not split your skull over proof. Let the prisoner's head ache over that, and you don't have to worry whether the prisoner is guilty or not, but simply do what the organs require, and everything will be all right. It will be up to you to make the interrogation periods pass as pleasurably as possible and not get overly fatigued. And it would be nice to get some food out of it, at least to amuse yourself, get some good out of it. You have been sitting for a long time, and all of a sudden a new method of persuasion occurs to you. Eureka! So you call up your friends on the phone, and you go around to the other offices and tell them about it. What a laugh! Who shall we try it on, boys? It's really pretty monotonous to keep doing the same thing all the time. Those trembling hands, those imploring eyes, that cowardly submissiveness, they are really a bore. If you could just get one of them to resist. I love strong opponents. It's such fun to break their backs, said the Leningrad interrogator Shitov to GT. And if your opponent is so strong that he refuses to give in, all your methods have failed, and you are in a rage, then don't control your fury. It's tremendously satisfying, that outburst. Let your anger have its way. Don't set any bounds to it. Don't hold yourself back. That's when interrogators spit in the open mouth of the accused and shove his face into a full cuspidor. That's the state of mind in which they drag priests around by their long hair or urinate in a kneeling prisoner's face. After such a storm of fury, you feel yourself a real honest-to-God man. Or else you are interrogating a foreigner's girlfriend, so you curse her out, and then you say, "Come on now, does American have a special kind of blank? Is that it? Weren't there enough Russian ones for you?" And all of a sudden you get an idea. Maybe she learned something from those foreigners. Here's a chance not to be missed, like an assignment abroad. And so you begin to interrogate her energetically. How, what positions, more, in detail, every scrap of information. You can use the information yourself, and you can tell the other boys too. The girl is blushing and all over and in tears. It doesn't have anything to do with the case, she protests. Yes, it does. Speak up. That's power for you. She gives you the full details if you want. If you want, she'll draw a picture for you. If you want, she'll demonstrate with her body. She has no way out. In your hands, you hold the punishment cell and her prison term. And if you have asked for a stenographer to take down the questions and answers, and they send in a pretty one, you can shove your paw into her bosom right in front of the boy being interrogated. He's not a human being after all, and there's no reason to feel shy in his presence. In fact, there's no reason for you to feel shy with anyone. And if you like the broads, and who doesn't, you'd be a fool not to make use of your position. Some will be drawn to you because of your power, and others will give in out of fear. So you've met a girl somewhere and she's caught your eye. She belongs to you. Never fear, she can't get away. Someone else's wife has caught your eye, she'll be yours too. Because after all, there's no problem about removing the husband. No, indeed. To know what it meant to be a blue cap, one has to experience it. Anything you saw was yours. Any apartment you looked at was yours. Any woman was yours. Any enemy was struck from your path. The earth beneath your feet was yours. The heaven above was yours. And it was, after all, like your cap, sky blue. The passion for gain was their universal passion. After all, in the absence of any checking up, such power was inevitably used for personal enrichment. One would have had to be holy to refrain. If we were able to discover the hidden motivation behind individual arrest, we would be astounded to find that, granted the rules governing arrests in general, 75% of the time the particular choice of whom to arrest, the personal cast of the die, was determined by human greed and vengefulness. And of that 75%, half were the result of material self-interest on the part of the local NKVD, and of course the prosecutor too. For on this point, I do not distinguish between them. How, for example, did V.G. Vlasov's 19-year-long journey through the archipelago begin? As head of the district consumer cooperatives, he arranged a sale of textiles for the activists of the local party organization. These materials were a sort and quality which no one nowadays would even touch. No one was bothered, of course, by the fact that the sale was not even open to the general public. But the prosecutor's wife was unable to buy any. She wasn't there at the time. Prosecutor Rusov himself had been shy about approaching the counter, and Vlasov hadn't thought to say, "I'll set some aside for you." In fact, given his character, he would never have said this anyways. Furthermore, Prosecutor Rusov had invited a friend to dine in the restricted party dining room. Such restricted dining rooms used to exist in the 30s. This friend of his was not of high enough rank to be admitted there, and the dining room manager refused to serve him. The prosecutor demanded that Vlasov punish the manager, and Vlasov refused. Vlasov also managed to insult the district KVD just as painfully. He was therefore added to the rightist opposition. The motivations and actions of the Bluecaps are sometimes so petty that one can only be astounded. Security officer Zenchenko took a map case and dispatch case from an officer he'd arrested and started to use them right in his presence, and by manipulating the documentation, he took a pair of foreign gloves from another prisoner. When the armies were advancing, the Bluecaps were especially irritated because they only got second pick of the booty. The counterintelligence officer of the 49th Army who arrested me had a yen for my cigarette case. And it wasn't even a cigarette case, but a small German army box of a tempting scarlet, however. And because of that piece of shit, he carried out a whole maneuver. At his first step, he omitted it from the list of belongings that were confiscated from me. You can keep it. He thereupon ordered me to be searched again, knowing all the time that it was all I had in my pockets. Aha, what's that? Take it away. And to prevent my protests, put him in the punishment cell. What czarist gendarme would have dared behave that way towards a defender of the fatherland? Every interrogator was given an allowance of a certain number of cigarettes to encourage those willing to confess and to reward stool pigeons. Some of them kept all the cigarettes for themselves, even in accounting for hours spent in interrogating. They used to cheat. They got higher pay for a night work. And we used to note the way they wrote down more hours on the night interrogations than they really spent. Interrogator Fyodorov stole a wristwatch while searching the apartment of the free person Korzukin. During the Leningrad blockade, interrogator Nikolai Fyodorovich Khrushchev told Yelizaveta Viktorovna Strakovich, wife of the prisoner he was interrogating, "I want to quit, bring it to me," when she replied, "All our warm things are in the room they've sealed." He went to her apartment and, without breaking the state security seal on the lock, unscrewed the entire doorknob. "That is how the MTB works," he explained gaily. And he went in and began to collect warm things, shoving some crystal in his pocket at the same time. She herself tried to get whatever she could out of the room, but he stopped her. "That's enough for you," and he kept on raking in the booty. There's no end to such cases. One could issue 1,000 white papers, and beginning in 1918 one would need only to question systematically former prisoners and their wives. Many there are and were Bluecaps who never stole anything. Oh, maybe there are and were Bluecaps who never stole anything or appropriated anything for themselves, but I find it impossible to imagine one. I simply do not understand, given the Bluecaps' philosophy of life. What was there to restrain them if they liked something in particular? Way back at the beginning of the 30s, when all of us were marching around in German uniforms of the Red Youth Front and were building the first 5-year plan, they were spending their evenings in salons like the one on the apartment of Concordia. You'll see, behaving like members of the nobility or Westerners, and their lady friends were showing off their foreign clothes. Where were they getting these clothes? Here are their family names, and one might almost think that they were hired because of those names. For example, in the Kemerova Provincial State Security Administration, there were a prosecutor named Trudnev Drone, a chief of interrogation named Major Shkurkin, self-server, his deputy, Lieutenant Colonel Balandin, Supi, and an interrogator, Skorok Gavadov, quick grabber, when all is said and done, one could not invent names more appropriate, and they were all right there together. I need hardly bother to mention again Volkop-Yelov, Wolf, Skin Stretcher, or Grabashchenko, Plunderer. Are we to assume that nothing at all is expressed in people's family names, and such a concentration of them? Again, the prisoner's faulty memory. Kornoyev has forgotten the name of the Colonel of State Security, who was also Konkordayev Yossi's friend. They both knew her, it turned out, who was in the Vladimir detention prison at the same time as Kornayev. This colonel was the living embodiment of the instincts for power and personal gain. At the beginning of 1945, during the height of the war booty period, he got himself assigned to a section of the organs headed by Abakumov himself, which was supposed to keep watch over the plundering. In other words, they tried to grab off as much for themselves as possible, not for the state, and succeeded brilliantly. Our hero pulled in whole freight carloads and built several dashes. One of them in Klin. After the war, he operated on such a scale that when he arrived at the Novosibirsk station, he ordered all the customers chased out of the station restaurant and had the girls and women rounded up and forced to dance naked on the tables to entertain him and his drinking companions. He would have gotten away with this too, but he violated another important rule. Like Khrushchev, he went against his own kind. Khrushchev deceived the organs, and this colonel perhaps did even worse. He laid bets on which wives he could seduce, and not just ordinary wives, but the wives of his colleagues in the security police. And he was not forgiven. He was sentenced to a political prison under Article 58 and was serving out his time fuming at their having dared to arrest him. He had no doubt they would change their minds, and perhaps they did. That dread fate, to be thrown in prison themselves, was not such a rarity for the Bluecaps. There was no genuine insurance against it, but somehow these men were slow to sense the lessons of the past. Once again, this was probably due to their having no higher powers of reason. Their low-grade intellect would tell them it happens only rarely, very few get caught, and it may pass me by. My friends won't let me down. Friends, as a matter of fact, did try not to leave their friends in a bad spot. They had their own unspoken understanding, at least to arrange favorable conditions for friends. This was the case, for example, with Colonel Vorobayev in the Marfino Special Prison, and with the same Iine, who was in the Lubyanka for more than 8 years. Thanks to this caste spirit, those arrested singly as a result of only personal shortcomings usually did not do too badly, and that was how they were able to justify their sense of immunity from punishment in their day-to-day work in the service. But there were several known cases when camp security officers were tossed into ordinary camps to serve out their sentences. There were even instances when, as prisoners, they ran into Zeks who had once been under their thumb and came off badly in the encounter. For example, security officer Munchin, who cherished a particularly violent hatred towards the 58th in camp and had relied heavily on the support of the Blatnya, the habitual thieves, was driven right under the board bunks by those very same thieves. However, we have no way to learn more details about these cases in order to help explain them. But those Gaibitsi, the state security officers who got caught in a wave, were in very serious danger. They had their own waves. A wave is a natural catastrophe and is even more powerful than the organs themselves. In this situation, no one was going to help anyone else, lest he be drawn into the same abyss himself. The possibility did exist, however, if you were well informed and had a sharp Czechist sensitivity of getting yourself out from under the avalanche, even at the last minute, by proving that you had no connection with it. Thus it was Captain Sayenko, not the Kharkov Czechist carpenter of 1918-19, who was famous for executing prisoners with his pistol, punching holes in the bodies with a saber, breaking shin bones in two flattening heads with weights, and branding people with hot irons. But perhaps a relative was weak enough to marry for love an ex-employee of the Chinese Eastern Railroad named Kokhayanskaya. And suddenly he found out right at the beginning of the wave that all Chinese Eastern Railroad people were going to be arrested. At this time he was head of the Security Operations Department of the Archangel GPU. He acted without losing a moment. How? He arrested his own beloved wife, and not on the basis of her being one of the Chinese Eastern Railroad people, but on the basis of a case he had cooked up. Not only did he save himself, but he moved up and became chief of the Tomsk province in KVD. The waves were generated by the organs, hidden law of self-renewal, a small periodic ritual sacrifice so that the rest could take on the appearance of being purified. The organs had to change personnel faster than the normal rate of human growth and aging would ensure. Driven by the same implacable urgency that forces the sturgeon to swim upriver and perish in the shallows, to be replaced by schools of small fry, a certain number of schools of Gaibitsi had to sacrifice themselves. This law was easily apparent to the higher intelligence, but the Bluecaps themselves did not want to accept the fact of its existence and make provisions for it. Yet, at the hour appointed in their stars, the kings of the organs, the aces of the organs, and even the ministers themselves laid their heads down beneath their own guillotine. Yagoda took one such school of fish. Along with him, no doubt, many of those whose glorious names we shall come to admire when we come to the White Sea Canal were taken in the school, and their names thenceforward expunged from poetic eulogies. Very shortly, a second school accompanied the short-lived Yezhov. Some of the finest cavaliers of 1937 vanished in this one, yet one ought not to exaggerate their number. It did not by any means include all the best. Yezhov himself was beaten during his interrogation. He was pitiful, and Gulag was orphaned during this wave of arrests. For example, arrested with Yezhov were Chief of the Financial Administration of Gulag, the Chief of Medical Administration of Gulag, Chief of the Guard Service of Gulag, and even the Chief of the Security Operations Department of Gulag, who oversaw the work of the Camp Godfathers. And later was the School of Beria. And later there was a School of Beria. The corpulent, conceited Abakumov had fallen earlier separately. Someday, if the archives are not destroyed, the historians of the organs will recount this all step by step, with all the figures and the glittering names. Therefore, I am going to write only briefly about Ryumin and the Abakumov story, as I learned only by chance I will not repeat what I have already written about them. Ryman had been raised to the heights by Abu Kamab and was very close to him. At the end of 1952, he came to Abu Kamab with a sensational report that Professor Ettinger, a physician, had confessed to intentional malpractice while treating Zhdanov and someone else with the purpose of killing them. Bukamov refused to believe him. He knew the whole cookery and decided Ryumin was getting too big for his britches. But Ryumin had a better idea of what Stalin wanted. To verify the story, they arranged to cross-question Ettinger that very evening, but each of them drew different conclusions from his testimony. Bakamov concluded that there was no such thing as a doctor's case, and Ryman concluded that there was. A second attempt at verification was to take place the following morning, but thanks to the miraculous attributes of the nighttime institution, Ettinger died. That very night, in the morning room and bypassing Abakumov, and without his knowledge, telephoned the Central Committee and asked for an appointment with Stalin. My own opinion, however, is that this was not his most decisive step. Ryumin's decisive action was following which his life hung in the balance, was in not going along with Abu Kamov's earlier, and perhaps in having Ettinger killed that same night. Who knows the secrets of those courtyards? Had Ryumin's contact with Stalin begun earlier, perhaps Stalin received Ryumin, set in motion the doctor's case, and arrested Abakumov. From that point on, it would seem that Ryumin conducted the doctor's case independently, and even despite Beria, there were signs before Stalin's death that Beria was in danger, and perhaps it was he who arranged to have Stalin done away with. One of the first acts of the new government was to dismiss the doctor's case, and that time Ryumin was arrested while Beria was still in power, but Abakumov was not released. At the Lubyanka, a new order of things was introduced, and for the first time in its entire existence, a prosecutor crossed its threshold. Terekov imprisoned Ryumin, was fidgety and subservient. I am not guilty. I am here for no reason. He asked to be interrogated. As was his custom, he was sucking a hard candy at the time, and when Terekov rebuked him for it, he spat it out on the palm of his hand. Pardon me? As we have already reported, Abakumov roared with laughter. Hocus pocus. Terekov showed him the document authoring him to inspect the internal prison of the Ministry of State Security. Abakumov brushed it away. You could forge 500 of those. As an organizational patriot, he was principally offended by not being imprisoned but by this encroachment on the power of the organs, which could not be subordinate to anything in the world. In July 1953, Ryumin was tried in Moscow and shot, and Abakumov remained in prison. During one interrogation, he said to Terekov, "Your eyes are too beautiful. I'm going to be sorry to have to shoot you. Leave my case alone. Leave it while you still have time." On another occasion, Terekov called him in and handed him the newspaper which carried the announcement of Beria's exposure. At that time, it was virtually a cosmic upheaval. Abakumov read it, and with not so much as a twitch of an eyebrow, he turned the page and started to read the sports news. On another occasion, during an interrogation in presence of high-ranking Gapist who had, in the recent past, been his subordinate, Abakumov asked him, "How could you have permitted the investigation of the Beria case to be conducted by the prosecutor's office instead of the MGB?" Everything in his own domain kept nagging him. He went on, "Do you really believe they're going to put me, the Minister of State Security, on trial?" The answer was yes, and he replied, "Then put your top hat on. The organs are finished." He was, of course, too pessimistic, uneducated courier that he was. But when he was in the Lubyanka, Abakumov was not afraid of being tried. He was afraid of being poisoned. This too showed what a worthy son of the organs he was. He started to reject the prison food altogether and would eat only eggs that he bought from the prison store. In this case, he simply lacked the technical imagination. He thought one couldn't poison eggs. The only books he borrowed were from well-stocked Lubyanka library, were the works of, believe it or not, Stalin, who had imprisoned him. But in all likelihood, this was for show rather than the result of any calculation that Stalin's adherents would gain power. He spent 2 years in prison. Why didn't they release him? The question is not a naive one. In terms of his crimes against humanity, he was over his head in blood. But he was not the only one, and all the others came out of it safe and sound. There is some hidden secrets here too. There is a vague rumor that in his lifetime he had personally beaten Khrushchev's daughter-in-law, Luba, the wife of Khrushchev's older son, who had been condemned to a punishment battalion in Stalin's time, and who died as a result. And so goes the rumor. This is why, having been imprisoned by Stalin, he was tried in Leningrad under Khrushchev and shot on December 18, 1954. But Abakumov had no reason to be depressed. The orphans still didn't